What kind of flowers you got growing behind you? Not going to answer me, huh? I can't hear you, Carl.
I'll answer after the meeting, I think,
Oh,
right?
there you go.
Zoom meeting.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 4:30. I'll call the meeting of the Judiciary and Law Committee of the Dunn County Board of Supervisors to order. Let the roll call reflect that Supervisor Zahns is not with us at this point. I haven't heard from him. I don't know if he plans to be here or not. I know that these meetings sometimes interfere with his work schedule, so we'll see. Otherwise,
I have him up on my screen. I don't know if he's there or not.
He just connected.
oh, he did. I don't see him anywhere. Oh, there he is. Same expression too. He's always looks the same. That's Zahns. I tell you, that guy is stoic. Then all the members of the committee are present, as well as Chairman Dave Bartlett, number of staff. This is a special meeting to review some of the department budgets. So there won't be any minute approval tonight. There won't be any business that I know of. Krista, are there any public that wish to comment?
I didn't receive any public comment.
Thank you. Nothing for item number 4. So we'll get right to item number 5. And we're going to take up the budget of the clerk of courts first. I see our CFO Keith Stry is here, and we'll conduct this meeting similar to the way we did it last week with those budgets. Seemed to work fairly well. And I prefer to take a look at the organizational chart first so that we can look at any potential position changes, additions. And so Keith, if you want to take over and share your screen, I'll let you guide us through this budget process.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the benefit of those that weren't here last week, or just as a reminder, what we'll do is I will bring up and share my screen as Chairman Bartlett has mentioned. We'll start with the org chart, finish discussion there, and certainly the committee can ask questions. And then we'll move over to the actual budget document, the details, and I'll scroll through it. And then committee members can ask questions they may have. The affected department staff certainly speak up if there's things to point out, and we'll go from there. So with that, let me share my screen. And let's see, of course, it's not grabbing what I had saved. I thought I had it, you would think I would have it down after last meeting. I apologize, Mr. Chair. I have all this stuff saved on my desktop, and for whatever reason, it's not presenting. Let's see here. Best laid plans.
We'll always forgive technology errors.
In my case, it might be operator error, but we'll let that one for now.
Operator of technology errors.
Here we go. We'll share this. All right. The first one up, is everybody seeing it?
Yep.
Okay, good. So, Katie, I guess I'll turn this over to you to the proposed organizational chart.
Yep. So there's just a couple corrections, Keith, that we actually need to make for the judges. There should actually be 3 now listed versus 2, because we now have 3 judges, and we'll also need to change the court reporter to 3 as well. And those are both state employees, just so everybody knows there's no county funds used for either of those positions. The biggest change for the 2022 budget is we are requesting a part-time judicial assistant position within the judge's office. So it is bold and highlighted judicial assistant, and it says 2.75. There are currently 2 full-time judicial assistants at the time, and we're asking for a 0.75 position. There is a cost associated with adding this. It is a county expense. It is going to cost $49,860 for this position for 2022. We did increase our revenues, and we will be receiving additional state aid in hopes to be able to offset the cost for this position. With us gaining a 3rd judge, the state does pay around $43,000 to each county for each judgeship position. So for our 2021 budget that we're currently in, we increased our state money by $21,000 to cover a portion of the year. And for 2022, we're going to also increase that line item by another $21,000. We're also increasing our revenue by an additional $8,000 just to realign with what we've been gaining the last couple of years. So it's going to total about $50,000 in additional revenue from our 2021 to 2022 budget. That there will cover that judicial assistant position in full. And it should not be any additional cost to the county for that. As far as the clerk of court's office, nothing is changing. The deputy clerks, we have 10, our jury bailiffs, they're remaining the same, and our register and probate position is 1 full-time position as well. Supervisor Tripp had asked earlier who our court commissioner and family court commissioner is. That is David Schoenberger. He's a local attorney in town. Previously, it used to be Brent Skinner. And then our family mediation counseling services is Tri-Mediation. They're out of Eau Claire County, and we use them for our family and paternity actions when we need to send parties to mediation. The judges does have a contractual services on their budget. That is just kept in there in case they need to hire anybody else to be on call for them. They do not believe that they're going to need to for 2022, but we just kept it on there in case that expense needed to be taken place in 2022. Are there questions about this layout or of our organizational chart?
And just for the benefit of the committee, I did hear the comments before the meeting about the updates that are required. I've reached out to administration myself, and as soon as I get an updated version, I will post it out on the website.
That judicial assistant goes beyond 2022?
Correct. It would start in 2022 and go forward every single year. It would not just be a one-time position for 1 year. It would be general levy funds going forward, but we would receive the additional state aid each year due to having that 3rd judgeship position. And hopefully I can keep our revenue, a budget amounts the same, so we wouldn't have to decrease them. In theory, it would one time pay for it, but each year our revenues make up for that additional cost for that position.
I can't see everybody, so if you've got a question and I can't see you, say something, or I was going to say I can't see you, so raise your hand. But that's the way I did it when I taught. If I couldn't see them and they raised their hand, that was perfect. All right, Keith, I think you can probably go ahead into the budget.
Okay, let me go over here. There we go. That works a little bit better. And let's see here. I'm just moving some stuff around on my screen. So can everybody see that? I've got the summary up. Okay.
Yeah.
So what this is the summary of the budget, and probably that just gives you a snapshot, and the requests overall in costs are 4.7%. And now we're getting into the detail. And we blow this up a little bit to help with the readability. And again, you can always follow along if it's helpful on your end. Certainly, this is off the county's website. Everybody's operating from the same version for this, from the information provided at the end of July. So the top of this starts with the various revenue sources for the the three budgets here, 2 operating and then the capital projects. In the court clerk's budget, the general levy ask increase is 7.21%. Guardian ad litem has a notable increase. Katie, do you want to talk to those 2 points?
Yep. Yeah, so I guess the 7.21% increase for our overall budget incorporates the expenditures as well as, the expenditures essentially. So the GAL, we did have an increase. That's just to realign with what we've been receiving from the state the last 4 years. So I felt safe that we could increase that by a couple $1,000s. The state aid interpreter, we kept the same. We have not, I don't see us gaining any more money from the state. So the state gives us money regarding guardian ad litems, interpreters, and then having our judges in the overall operating costs. And that's listed in the state Judicial Assistant line. So I've moved it from $171,000 to $192,000 for 2022. That includes the $21,000 increase that I spoke earlier about for having our 3rd judge. They gave us part of the money this year in 2021, and then the second dose or the second half of it will come in 2022. That would be the full amount that we would receive.
Now, Katie, didn't you say that the state contribution for an additional judge was $43,000?
Correct. It is. I'm looking at one more sheet of paperwork here. What it is, they give you a minimum of the 42,275, so it's almost $43,000. But they
Okay.
also take into consideration all of our operational expenditures for 1 year, and they take the amount of the total state budget divided by all of the counties, and then they give us a prorated portion in addition to the 42,275 amount for the judges. So we used to collect about $150,000. They're anticipating that we should receive about $192,000 from the state. So for the 3 judges and then the additional funding that's available through the state administration budget.
Okay, so that's an addition, a total additional state aid. And what lines does that show up on besides the judicial assistant line?
Yep, the judicial assistant line. That's
Guardian ad litem.
Yep, the guardian ad litem, and that's its own individual column as well within the state budget. So we've been receiving a little over $50,000, $53,000 each year. So I felt safe that we could increase it to $52,500 for 2020.
Okay.
And then the interpreter is the additional $7,000 as well. And we've both been receiving about $7,000 for them each year. So I did not think we could increase that.
You don't think there will be an increase in that state aid for interpreter?
I do not believe so. No, we've been receiving more with our guardian ad litems. It goes off a percentage of how much you use. And we've been expending like $60-some thousand for guardian ad litems each year. Therefore, they've been giving us an increase to help offset the county payout for that.
That's another question I was going to ask, both for the interpreter and the guardian ad litem. How much, and maybe you can't answer this very precisely, but how much of our actual expenses reimbursed or funded by state aid? Do you know? So
we can collect, we get the state aid for the guardian ad litem, and we can also collect from the party who utilizes the guardian ad litem. So the state is going to contribute about $52,500, I'm estimating, for 2022. Anything in addition to that, we also ask that the parties repay the court system. So if you actually look further down in our budget line items, PCS Circuit Court Revenue GAL,
Yep.
at $66,500, that's actually what we, the county, collect from individuals. So a party is ordered or has a guardian ad litem, the judges then order that they reimburse the county. The guardian turn their bill into us, we pay them out 100%, but then we collect from that individual that used that. So
as long as we're talking about this, right above that line, it's FFP. What does that stand for?
Fines, forfeitures, and penalties.
Oh,
Penalties,
okay.
yep.
And PCS is,
Public charges for services.
Thank you, Keith. I was gonna say that's an S. Not sure what that meant.
okay, so those basically are fee type
Correct.
revenues. Okay. So those are collectible if we can collect them.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So based on, traffic tickets, any new case filings, also some, a portion of the court cost filing fee that we get to collect, and that makes up those revenue line items.
Okay, thank you.
So if there's no other questions on the clerk budget,
I've got a question. On that line, the state judicial assistant, so that is a reimbursement from the state for our judicial assistants?
It's not specific to the judicial assistant position. It's actually a circuit court payment from the state for operating the courts by the county.
Okay,
I say more judicial assistants, not assistant like the position, just because it's based off of the jobs that you have and your overall expenditures and your operating costs. That's what the state prorates and gives us the $192,000.
okay, and how they come up with that is they give us about 42,000 per judge plus other expenses.
Correct, yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep, nope, that's correct. I was gonna say, I did increase our probate fees from
Well,
9,000.
excuse me, I've got one more question then that comes up. Last year you had 171,000 in there, and you said that they were going to reimburse us about 42,000 more for the third judge. So shouldn't have that went up? Or you put some of that in the other piles?
I did not put it in the other piles.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep,
okay, so bottom line with the court clerk's budget, the revenue is increased by 5.44%. And I'm sure when we scroll down, we'll see equal change for expenditure side. So then we'll go down here to the court judges operating revenues. And this one is primarily funded by tax levy, and an increase here. Katie, if you want to touch on that, please.
yeah, the increase where it shows the 79.87% increase, that's due to the county. We had requested $150,000 in contingency funds on the off chance that we got the third judge in 2020, I believe. Keith, is that correct? And then the county used the contingency funds from 2020 to apply towards the 2021 judge's budget. Instead of using all general levy tax dollars, the fund balance applied in the amount of $69,015. That was from the contingency fund from 2020. So it shows a large increase for 2022, but it's due to the contingency funds that were used versus general levy funds.
And to say it another way, it was kind of the phase in for the additional judge position as part of that whole thing, the planning process that started in 2020 and flowed into 21. And now we're seeing the full, this will be more or less the landing where it is now as far as funding from property tax levy, unless there's a change in other revenue sources coming in.
Correct.
Because if you look at the bottom line here, the increase is 4.53%, which
Is salaries in the position.
line. Yes, salaries and benefits. Any questions there by the committee?
What did you say was 4.53%?
I don't know if you can see my the bottom line increase on revenue sources for the judge budget, 4.53%. It's just how the difference in how it was funded this year is now where it would more or less permanently land, barring new revenue sources.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was looking at the bottom line, 4.7%.
Oh, sure. Okay,
And then we did not ask for any capital expenditures for 2022. So that last year had $10,000. There's that for 2022.
and we were very fortunate last year with the routes to recovery, as well as some CJCC, I think DOJ grants, things to help us use outside revenue sources to really gear up for the third judge area.
Correct.
All right. Hearing no other questions on the revenues, I'll keep moving along here now. For those that were with us last week, you'll recall this white area are the wages and benefits information that's provided by Human Resources and Finance and entered in. These are your just the wages and benefits from the utilizing the pay scales based on a 2% pay grid increase, as well as steps. If you recall, last year step increases were removed from the budget for budgetary purposes. These also reflect an 8% increase in health insurance, and I believe it was a 2 or 3% in dental. The round two information that will be presented in September will show the recent changes that were approved last week by Committee on Admin after going out for bid on health and dental and getting updates from the state of Wisconsin on retirement. We actually have decreases down to 0%, no change for health insurance. Dental, I believe was a 0 as well. The retirement system has a decrease, a 0.5% decrease. So we've had some positive movement there, which will help close the gap. So any questions on this? I guess, Katie, the one thing I'd point out is the 7.44% increase on attendance hours. Is that just increased hours with staffing? Did we not split an additional position last year and this year? Is this the first full year of the one position, or am I off on that?
Nope, that's going to be the first full year of that additional deputy clerk position. So that would be the 7.44 increase.
This is the first full year. Last for 2021, it was we started that position funded what, half year, mid-year?
Correct. The position was not to be funded until August of 2021, and I've still not been able to fill because of a few retirements and staffing changes. So 2022 will be the first year for that full year position.
Okay, I just wanted to pull that out because that was a discussion point during the budget last year.
Yeah.
Any other questions or any questions in the wages and benefits for the clerk or clerk budget?
You mentioned that you haven't filled that position yet. When do you plan on filling it?
I'm working with admin right now to see when I can actually recruit for it. We had 2 people that were not planned retirements this year. And in order to make our budget not exceed, I've just said that I didn't have the position before so I might as well not fill it until our budget's made whole for 2021. I'm expecting probably October, November, but I'm still waiting to get that cost payout for the recent retirements that we had.
Okay, so you're gonna fill it yet this year?
Yep, that's the plan.
All right. Thank you.
Keith, are the numbers on wages and benefits likely to change because of the class and comp study that results are coming in?
In general terms, there are expected adjustments as we reported at the budget workshop. There was an estimated amount. I don't have which specific areas. We haven't received the detailed report. We're supposed to be receiving that tomorrow, and then we're going to be working our backsides off to get all that stuff entered and rolled out. But yeah, I anticipate there will be changes to be made, which will roll out to the department budgets. I just don't know which specific positions or which specific departments. All right, if there's no other questions on wages and benefits, I'm going to scroll down now to the operating portion. The first one's mental exams. Katie, that one's got a large increase. If you want to touch on that, please.
Yep, I did do a $500 increase for this line item because we've been overexpending the last 4 years on it. So what I did is I increased it by $7,500, but later down on the next page down on key, I decreased our jury operating expenses by $7,500 to offset them. We just haven't had as many jury trials as we previously had, but we've been going over spending $31,000 to $32,000 each year on examinations. And I just wanted that to be more accurate as to what our expenses have been each year.
Eddie, aren't we likely to have increased jury expenses this year or not?
You know, we've had a few trials, but quite a few of them that have been set to go have folded last minute. So I kind of explained to people back in 2005, 2006, Dunn County had 30 plus jury trials a year. From the mid 2015s, we've only had 10 to 15 jury trials a year. It's rare that we even have 20 jury trials. And I normally say a jury trial is about $1,000 a day, depending on how many jurors we call in and what their operator mileage expenses are. So I really feel good that we can decrease that. Even the year that we had that large Ezra McCandless jury trial that lasted multiple, we did not even expend our $35,000 in budget. And that was a bigger jury trial year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll keep scrolling down. You've touched on the notable variances at least. And certainly committee members, stop me, or Katie, if there's something else you want to touch base on, just jump in. Conferences, seminars, and I'm not going to read each of these. The percentage is large, the dollar amount, maybe not so much.
Yep. So you'll see on this page, the external jury duty, we decreased that by the $7,500. I did remove $500 from our office supply budget to help increase our IT equipment by $500 just to offset that.
Okay. So then, yes, the bottom line, like I mentioned before, when we looked at revenues, the increase for this budget is a corresponding 5.44%. So they'll balance out, you've balanced your revenues and expenditures. So with that said, any other questions on the court clerk budget?
Yeah, I have a question on the IT equipment. What was the big jump there?
Yep.
And why?
So previously, prior to COVID, the courts, we have minimal county owned equipment. The state provides the court all of our computers. The only actual equipment that the county pays for the courts is our copy machines and fax machines. But due to COVID and having to have staff work remotely, we ended up having to purchase, the county got some funding from the Roads to Recovery, I believe, for laptops. But now that we have those laptops, we have to keep operational costs for updates and maintaining that equipment. It's charged out to each department. So that's why there's a large jump in those line items. If and when we get to a point where we don't need to have staff remotely, I'll be turning those laptops over to IT and having them redistribute throughout the county to just individuals who need them so they don't take a kid out of our budget. But that's the large IT equipment cost.
Right, and Supervisor Rogers, I don't know if you've recall hearing this before. This was a change that was implemented, started with the 21 budget to roll out allocated share of replacing that equipment down the road to avoid having to borrow to buy technology.
I remember that.
Yeah, so that's what this reflects. All right, any other questions in the court clerk? Otherwise,
You're printing and duplicating, and is there any way to go paperless more on that or not? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of money there.
For the printing and duplication.
And all that, they're all together, copier supplies and all that stuff, just kind of curious if that's paperless.
We are fairly paperless for the most part. Our printing and duplication, a lot of those are envelopes. Traffic tickets, we mail out an envelope, or we send an envelope with each individual that gets cited in Dunn County with a response for them to plead not guilty or pay us back. So there is the paper involved, and we do technically have to still mail out judgments by paper. So we do a lot electronically, but there's still a lot of paper that we do use that we haven't been able to decrease yet. And I don't know that the state is going to find a way for us to do that, just because paper is the way that, according to the statutes, that's how individuals are served. So we're going to still have that paper expense.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
all right. We'll move down to the court judge budget now, operating budgets. And, the first thing, like is highlighted over here, this is the additional personnel that was requested, we touched on earlier. And then these again are the wages and benefits for staffing for the judge's office. Anything to point out there, Katie?
No, we try to maintain a 0% increase on this. There was an additional $190 for the IT equipment costs, and that's also due to their staffing receiving laptops from the county to work remotely. So we just took $190 out of the job-related education expenditure to offset that, to maintain that 0%.
So any questions on the court budget, judge's budget? Hearing none, the bottom line is there again, the 4.7% increase. This just shows that it's balanced, at least for presentation purposes. So if there's no other questions, I will turn it back over to Chairman Tripp, and if the committee wants to take any action on this budget request.
Oops, I think you're muted.
There we go. Thank you, Keith. It would probably be appropriate at this point to entertain a motion to recommend the budget for the courts to the executive committee. Once that's done, if there are, unless somebody would like to suggest changes ahead of time, otherwise we can have the amendment, and if changes are suggested, amend the amendment, or the motion, we can amend the motion. I am tangled up in my syntax here. Does anybody want to make a motion to forward this budget to the executive committee and get me off the hook? Supervisor Vandermeulen, thank you for the motion. Do I hear a second? Supervisor Bauer, very good, thank you. Now it's appropriate for discussion. If anybody has any further questions, suggested changes, any comments, any discussion at all? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion, recommend the budget for the courts, signify by saying aye or raise your hand, or both.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're muted, Jim.
That's probably good. I was reciting poetry. Sheriff's budget. Again, I would suggest, and Keith can handle the logistics, that we take a look at the sheriff's organizational plan. He has a proposal for a slightly revised organizational chart. And I see the sheriff and Marshall are both with us.
Mr. Chair, may I point out there is a chat message from Supervisor Zons. He's unable to unmute himself. I don't know if that's Krista, if there's anything you can do with that.
No, I sent the ask to unmute. I'm not sure why he can't unmute himself, but I did send it saying he could call in using his phone as well.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't want to.
Yeah, I see that now.
Okay.
Is your speaker turned on, Jim?
It says the host is blocking me.
Yeah, I'm looking into it. I don't know why it was.
Okay. Interesting.
Actually, we should do that at every meeting for one random person. I think that'd be a kind of a interesting way to do business. Keith, I'm going to turn this over to you, and if we could, please, we can start out with the organizational chart for the Sheriff's Department.
You bet. And I'll bring up the proposed one that's out on the website. And there you go. Let's see here. I might shrink this down so we can get it on one page. There, hopefully that's still readable. Sheriff, if you want to take it away and kind of go over what's proposed for next year.
Sure, and I'll be moving my cursor around even though you can't see it, but that's just for me to follow on the page. But what we'd like to do is we had a half-time secretary 2 position that we decided that we can eliminate based off from going to Zerker software, that the workload can support not having that position. We anticipated a retirement from the court security, one of the court security deputies. And I'm sure most of you don't understand, we have Bruce upstairs, which is a completely separate, he's specific to the courthouse for a jail court deputy, I should say. That is not a civil service hired position. It was hired back in '97 as specifically to court security. He initially told us at budget time that he was going to retire at the end of this year. Now it doesn't sound like he may not retire at the end of this year. But our goal is to take his position, which is paid about equivalent to a corrections officer, and combine that with the part-time secretary's position that we've eliminated to create a civil service deputy sheriff position. And what that does is allows us to be able to pull that deputy out of the courthouse and assign him patrol duties. Say, for example, court is closed, there's nothing going on, and we don't need 2 people upstairs. We can use them elsewhere. They can jump in a squad car, they can go to Elk Mound for an emergency. Currently, Bruce cannot do that. He isn't assigned a squad car. He drives his personal vehicle in, and we can't utilize him in that type of position. So to take that part-time deputy's position and then combine it with Bruce Sampson's court security position, we would make 1 full deputy sheriff position hired through the civil service process out of that. The only thing we're doing is eliminating that part-time secretary position. We're not adding an additional staff by doing this. It's simply combining 2 to create 1 more useful position.
So Sheriff, if I got this right, no increase in staff overall.
Correct. In fact, a decrease in a half of a position.
Thank you.
All right, anything else to note, Sheriff, or jail, or anything else?
No, otherwise I think everything stays status quo. I see transport officers are listed at 6. We actually only have 4, and those are part-time transport officers. The bottom center column, the court security officer, that's listed as 0. That would be our anticipated, once Bruce retires, move that into a full deputy sheriff position, and assign 2 regular deputy sheriffs to the courthouse instead of having a court security officer and a deputy sheriff assigned there right now.
All right, any other questions, or Mr. Chair, I'll take your lead if you want to move on to the next thing.
Right ahead, Keith.
All righty, let's see if I can do this easily and make it work well. All right, here's the sheriff's budget, and here's the summary in total for the sheriffs. Bring this up. All right, we'll go down the first page. And the first of several budgets for the sheriff is the patrol budget. And again, the revenues here, property tax levies 2.64%. Sheriff, correct me if I'm wrong, that's probably more representative of wages and benefits overall being probably the biggest impact there, correct?
Right. When you have 57 employees all rolled into that. That's going to show the biggest impact.
Okay. And then
Sheriff, excuse me, most of the people represented in this budget are union, right?
Half and half.
Oh, okay.
My jail staff
And-
is non-union. My patrol staff is union.
Okay, and what stage of the contract are we in at this point?
I believe they haven't started contract negotiations. This contract ends at the end of this year.
Okay,
So we need to negotiate this year yet and hopefully finalize that before the beginning of next year.
so contract negotiations might have an impact on actual costs for next year. Well, might have, will.
Yep, it sure will. I don't know what they projected, if it was a 2% increase like the rest of the county, but that's all, up for negotiations.
And Keith, you can answer that question.
Yeah, that's
projected-
my understanding in situations like this. If it's unknown, that we just project with the rest of the county.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So Sheriff, you also had a couple of things here with revenues that decreased on a percentage basis, fairly significant. But if you want to touch on those, the reserve and the sheriff process revenue.
Yeah, I'll have Marshall jump in here. The sheriff reserves and process revenues, we're just trying to align them to realistically what we've been seeing the last couple of years.
Okay, so an adjustment to actual more or less trends.
Correct.
Okay. And then same thing here for the charges for public safety, increase of $3,000. Same thing, adjusting to trends or actual projected.
Yeah, Marshall, remind me of that one. Charges, public safety.
Part of that is grant funding we received to complete specialized law enforcement tasks. Receive grants from the Department of Transportation to do, say, for speed or seatbelt enforcement. That comes in as a revenue. And then we also administer that payout to the villages if they choose to be involved in those enforcement efforts also. So it's kind of a money in, money out that may be relative to the amount of grant funding that the state has said they're willing to provide us. As far as the sheriff's reserve revenue, that's just more dictated by the size of our reserve division has decreased over those last few years, part of because of recruitment and retention issues. And there's less events that they're, accordingly less events that they work, therefore it brings down the amount of revenue. We're paying less out for reserve deputies, but then again, we're not using them at as many events, therefore not gaining as much revenue back into the county. So that's just more reflective to be, where we think it's going to be based on those changes.
All right, thank you. Any other questions by the committee on the patrol revenues? Hearing none, I'll keep moving down. Emergency first responders, no change there. Then we get into the jail, the 2.65%. Again, I'm assuming, Sheriff, this is reflective of wages and benefits essentially.
Yep.
All right. So then we'll move down to lower parts here. We're getting into the final jail assessment.
Excuse me, before we get into jail assessment.
Okay.
I think about the fifth line on the jail revenue. It's Board of Prisoners, non-county, I'm guessing. And that's got a $425,000. Is that reflective of the state prisoners that we house? How much of that is reflective of that housing of state prisoners, and what's that likely to do next year?
Well, that's the golden question right now. Marshall and I just talked about this. I think when we weren't housing inmates, I think we were around $200,000. So we increased that by $225,000 to be a little conservative, because realistically, if we fill 15 beds at 50 or 51.45 a day for 365 days, it comes out to be about $290,000. That's not realistically going to happen. If they continue to pay us for housing inmates that have been sentenced to prison, but they have not been able to accept yet, we're still going to see quite a bit of revenue from that. If they get their intake cleaned up, which they've been struggling with recently, we're holding 8 to 10 inmates on average that are waiting to go to prison, and they're paying us that $51.45 a day to house those. So we're seeing some revenue from that. We're looking into offsetting that revenue line item. Overall, we're going to have to work with Keith on reducing that, but I got a message from Dodge County today. They're looking at shutting down part of their facility because you can't keep corrections officers there. We're dealing with the same issue, but not quite as bad as others. They're looking to house out inmates. So the potential is there to try and recoup that revenue from the loss of our state inmates, which I think I told you about probably, almost 2 months ago now. We had the rug pulled out from underneath us on that. But realistically, we're going to need to back that revenue line item down, probably at least $100,000, $125,000, just to be conservative and realistic. We do make money in that line item from probation and parole holds. They pay us to house their inmates because they're state inmates. Technically, they're just out on probation. So there is revenue that normally comes into that line item. It just won't be as much as what we've been experiencing, well, when we had state inmates. It's been rare that what we've contracted with the state to provide for them, it's rare that they've actually filled all 15 beds. There was probably about 3 weeks here at one time that they filled all 15 beds. And then they just kind of started decreasing them and then pulled the rug out from underneath us completely and said the governor didn't put enough money in their budget to fund 800 beds that they had originally budgeted for contracting beds. And the governor only put 100 inmates or 100 beds in the contract for DOC. So where that's going to go, Marshall and I are still baffled as to where they're putting all these inmates that they've been farming out for years. But who knows what'll change between now and the end of this year.
So, Sheriff, if we were to project, obviously we're going to have to pull something together here, especially negative impact here to the county tax levy potential. Would we be able to at least come up with an estimate by the end of the week so we can put something in what's presented to the executive committee, maybe in that ballpark of 100 to 125,000?
Yeah, I would think we would probably, to be realistically, to make that, I can't see the line item, but the Board of Prisoners non-county, from 425,000 probably to 300,000. I think with St. Croix County, Dodge County, there's sheriffs all over that are hurting for jail staff and having to farm out their inmates. We're going to see some revenue from that, but we can't count on, filling 15 beds 365 days of the year.
Okay, so that would certainly be something that the committee could factor in when you get to the decision point on this budget, if you want to do that. And then when we get into expenditures, we can talk about if there's any potential reductions there that we can factor into that. We won't jump into that now since that's down later, unless you wish to. So,
no, thank you. We'll have to when we recommend the budget, we're going to have to be cognizant of the fact that we've got $125,000 that probably is not going to be there in revenue. Thank you. I just have one correction for the sheriff. That was not the governor's budget. That was the legislator's budget. He just signed it.
Well, yeah, he technically just signed it, I guess.
okay, then going down to the capital expenditures, well, I want to point out, first thing is taxes, property, general property. Basically, this is identifying what was in the CIP as funds for helping to replace squad cars. The CIP had 124,000, but I know there's been a lot of conversation over the years about not wanting to borrow for replacements of squads. Those are basically annual scheduled replacements of 3 a year. So when the revenue is being pulled together, I can't remember, Sheriff, if we've talked about this, but I felt, to start the conversation, at least I would leave it in property tax levy based on conversation, even though it is 24,000 above what the CIP had in it. So I just wanted to point that out. But that probably would be the preferred approach for especially these squads that are replaced every year, 3 at a time. The second item is the only item of funded by long-term debt for the CIP, and which was for your new patrol UTV. Now we'll be receiving state payments on this. Is that correct, Sheriff? Which will help us offset those payments down the road?
Right. If the budget's approved to purchase a UTV, a patrol UTV, we're like the boat. If you all remember, we bought a boat and then we're repaid 20% of that over 5 years for putting in our patrol hours in the boat. Same with the UTV. That's paid for by the state for patrol hours and reimbursed over a 5-year period of time, and then becomes a full asset to the county.
Are these numbers both for the squads and the UTV outside the levy limits, or are they subject to levy limits as well?
Nope, if they're property taxes, they're subject to levy limits. The only thing that we actively utilize outside of the levy limit are debt service payments.
Okay.
Okay, I've got a question on these two lines, if I could, Mr. Chair. First off, the squads, 124,000 is identified for tax levy, and the rest of it is coming from where?
It still is. This is identified as being funded by tax levy. So
the whole 148?
correct.
All right. But the 17 is long-term debt.
Correct.
And we're going to borrow that probably for 10 years and get it paid off in 5 years.
Correct.
I mean, we're going to get reimbursed in 5 years, but we're not going to pay it off for 10 years.
Right.
I was wondering about the position that you had. You mentioned that Bruce may not retire. If he's not going to retire until like sometime into next year, maybe we could take part of the money that's in the budget to pay his wages and not have to borrow for this $15,000. We had 15,000 in long-term borrowing.
Kevin, you want me to comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Dave, obviously if Bruce does not retire, what's going to happen is there will be a savings there because we're not filling that halftime secretary position, which I believe the salary with benefits in lieu of, or pay in lieu of benefits was in the $40,000 range. So basically we'd be paying Bruce's salary as we always have, but we would not be paying that part-time secretary's position. So there'd be a pretty good savings there. And I believe even once we had combined the two positions, there was a savings. I'd have to have Keith, specifying that. But I thought we initially thought there was about a $20,000 to $22,000 savings if that was to go in effect by combining the two positions. So there will be, money saved there, either if they are combined or if he does not retire and we continue to not fill that halftime secretary position under that proposal.
So what I'm proposing is we take 17,000 out of his wages and figure out how far down the road that would be in months. If it's like the beginning of the second quarter or whenever, and that's when you plan on filling that position.
Yeah, the wild card, Chairman Bartlett, is that we don't know when Bruce is going to retire, and it's kind of one of those things taboo to ask. You don't. He initially told us that he was going to retire at the end of this year. That's when we started this budget process. We started this plan. He could, in theory, go all the way through next year, and but it could be March 1st of next year. That's kind of the wild card in the whole thing.
And Mr. Chair, or I'm sorry, Supervisor Bartlett, Chairman Bartlett, I'd also point out that if we do reduce the budgeted revenues for the jail, we've got $125,000 hole to fill there too. That would have to be backfilled by tax levy or other reductions.
And I realize that that's a different discussion as far as I'm concerned. I don't like to borrow for something that, I mean, this piece of equipment probably won't last 10 years. I wouldn't borrow for a car and pay it off for 10 years, like take a loan out against my home and pay my car off for 10 years when the car isn't going to last 10 years. And so I don't think we should do that with the county equipment. And I believe we should try to come up with a way to have that in levy, because it's a piece of equipment that doesn't last that long. And the state evidently plans on it lasting 5 years, because that's how long it's gonna take for them to reimburse us for it. So this is one part of the budget that we can talk about. I realize we're gonna have to talk about the deficit of 125,000 someplace also. But I'm looking at that, the budget as it stands, that if the sheriff could come up with a month and say, well, we won't fill that deputy position until the beginning of the second quarter, we may have enough not to borrow for this UTV.
Yeah, and I think that's realistic that, we're not gonna, we can't seem to get anybody hired right now with recruitment issues, but I think that's realistic that we're gonna have that money left over in that wage area until Bruce decides to retire.
Well, maybe it's just me about that gets bothered about borrowing. I guess the other committee members will have to weigh in on this, but that would be my suggestion.
Chairman Tripp?
Supervisor Rogers, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with Dave that it doesn't make a lot of sense to borrow for 10 years on something that is got a lifetime of 5 years.
I agree with Supervisor Rogers and Chairman Tripp.
One of the things that we can do when we come to the end of the discussion is we can offer a motion that we could simply reduce the request for long-term financing down to zero. Right now it's
Offer amendment to that, maybe just identify that you want to transfer to property tax levy as the funding
right
for the UT.
right, because that's where it would come from if we realize savings from not hiring a deputy and keeping on the guy who's about to retire. I don't know, Keith, you've gone through this process with a few other committees. Does it make more sense to wait until the end of the budget discussion, put all those things in one motion, or
I've seen it go different ways, but I'll be honest with you, I've got them noted here and I will bring them up. You could take a motion to, if you want to include those amendments right away in the original motion, the budget as presented with the two following amendments.
Let's do that. At the end of the budget discussion, we'll recommend the budget with the notations that you have made that we've agreed to. And we can look at those one at a time before we go to the main motion.
Okay. Any
Okay.
questions on revenues? Otherwise, I'll move down into the expenditures now.
I have a question for you. They list 4 patrol cars on this screen here, and down further, you're asking for 3 squads. Is that 7 total, or is this just a duplicate?
What the total, 148,000 that we submitted for is 3 squads at 38,000 per squad. The replacement of 2 squad mounted video cameras at 11,000. The replacement of 2 radar units at 7, and then ceramic ballistic plates at a cost of 16,000, which totals up to the 148,000. So it is 3 squads, not 4, and the total of all those capital expenditure items leads to that total.
Later on, it says it's 165,000 on asset transportation equipment.
That was the 148 plus the 17 for the UTV for the total of 165.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll see that when we get down further, if that's okay. All right, and this must be a typo then, just here up in the revenues. So no other questions. I'll continue moving down into the patrol operating expenditures. So in this area, again, like the other ones, we'll start with the wages and benefits. Again, 2.75%, 1.74. Those are pretty much the pay plan and union contract increases. All-in pays, Sheriff, I don't know if you have any feedback on that one, or I know that was one of the adjustments based on actual, if I remember right, from the prior year. Is that correct? Sheriff, are you muted?
I was, and for some reason I click on it and it wouldn't unmute.
Okay.
It was intentional. Yeah, I think that, that came from either HR or your finance office, but I think that was to align to more realistic what we've paid over the years.
Okay, so one of the things with this budget, for example, call-in pay or on-call pay, I should say, that was based on, I believe, last year's as well. So there was some fresh eyes looking at this. Health insurance incentive, again, tied to actual utilization with a large budget, with a large number of employees that, depending on if people jump on the insurance plan or not, can make a big difference on some of these individual items. So again, this all comes predominantly from HR payroll. So any questions on the wages and benefits for the patrol? Otherwise, we'll move down into operating expenses.
Just a question, what is PEHP expense?
Post-employment health plan expense.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And we'll move down into the actual operating expenditures that the sheriff and his team have a little more direct control over. So again, IT costs, are these part of some of the advancements and improvements that you've made? Now these are the ongoing maintenance. Is that correct, Sheriff?
Right, Marshall can expand on this a little bit, but the maintenance contracts includes our WatchGuard camera systems. We're basically going from 25 in-car cameras to adding 25 on-person cameras for a total of around 50 cameras. So our maintenance contracts and warranties obviously go up with that, and that's why you're seeing a large increase there.
Yeah, getting into that, like our maintenance contracts, some of the larger ones are IT directs a certain part of the maintenance contracts, what that's going to cost. So you have some increases there. Like the sheriff was saying, with the addition, well, basically doubling of the cameras, there's going to be more increased costs with the maintenance, the warrant. There's maintenance and warranty contracts to cover those because they are obviously the technology there is expensive. So to have the replacement plans in place is something we need. A good chunk of that is for records management system, Zerker, which the sheriff was referring to earlier. The addition to that is increased efficiency enough where, again, we felt there was a need to have the half-time secretary position. Some of these maintenance contracts too are for the building and equipping of our squads when they come around. But those are some of the larger maintenance ones. Some of the other ones are as simple as, our contracts for copiers, printers, dictation software, and that are all going to that total there. But the biggest increase in it is just the maintenance and support of the additional cameras, the hardware, software for maintaining the video off of them.
Okay. Now keep scrolling down here. That ties into, I believe, those licenses you say have listed here, addition of body cameras. Scrolling down here. Okay.
Can you say a little bit about the cell phone replacement?
Yes, that working with IT, they've determined that, how many year replacement plan for cell phones. Our cell phones aren't obviously on patrol, aren't just used for the phone call purposes. They're utilized for, we utilize our phones as dictation systems also for recording interviews with victims and suspects. Also, we utilize them. They are our cameras now that we use on scene and download them to our records management system. So obviously technology changes pretty quick. They're used quite a bit. So it was their opinion that we should stay in a replacement program, and they determined next year should be the appropriate time to replace those cell phones.
Now, is that replacement of all the cell phones? And what I'm getting at is there a kind of a rotational thing like we're trying to do with larger capital equipment? This is not a huge expense, but you see where I'm going, right?
Yeah, no, they're all the same. They're all purchased at the same time, so we replace them all at the same time. They're all the same models. It's just, I don't want to say easier that way, but rather than having an iPhone 9, iPhone 12 out there, or whatever that might be, we have just been purchasing them all at once on a regular schedule. So obviously you won't see the replacement of them for several years again, based on IT's recommendation for rollover.
Right, and that makes a lot of sense. Do you get a kind of a bargain on that too then?
We get with the contract with the county, we're eligible for upgrades every year. I don't know that we get a huge price break on the actual phones themselves. But sometimes we look at, we're not getting the absolutely newest model, depending on the price point. At that time of the year, we talk about whether we can get the last year's model. It's still being much, newer than we have. You just got to kind of look at what you're getting for the money at that point. And we usually consult with IT on that because they know a little bit more about that than we do.
And Mr.
Thank you.
Tripp, what we generally see is if, say they come out with an iPhone 14 now, we're eligible for a replacement. That iPhone 14 will only cost us $400, but if you walk into a Verizon store, it'll cost $800. But now the iPhone 13 just dropped to $100, but it's still better than what we have. Sometimes we take that bargain and take the $100 upgrade versus the $400 upgrade. But so we kind of play that by ear when the time comes of what's available. But the recommendation from IT is to try and stay, on top of, the newest version coming out, because like anything in the IT world, by the time it hits your desk, it's already outdated. So.
Thank you. All that makes sense.
Okay, any other questions on the operational budget for Sheriff's Patrol?
Yeah. On the conferences and seminars line, how much of that is required annual training, refresher training? What are we looking at there? What kind of conferences, seminars? I know that virtually every licensed professional in Wisconsin has a certain requirement to maintain the license. You need to take additional training. And I'm wondering if this is part of that line.
This is pretty much exactly what it is. It's annual recertification. Certified law enforcement officers in the state of Wisconsin have a minimum of 24 hours of training. So that it covers our annual costs. There is some reimbursement from the state on some of that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, one other thing. The gasoline line. A few years ago, we started getting bulk gas, and I'm assuming it seems like there was a significant decrease in our overall fuel costs at that time. Are we still seeing a relative savings by buying our gas in bulk and then getting it at the highway shop?
Yes, we are. Last time I ran our budget report, as of that point, we still had 70% of our fuel budget left. We budgeted 115,000. We expended nearly 35,000. Again, that's one of those fluid things. Even buying it in bulk from the highway shop just depends on what price they get it for. Sometimes, it's always a better savings, but it seems like when we were down in the past, the gases would go through the roof. Right now, we've been pretty lucky; it stayed pretty steady. But yeah, we have been seeing a significant savings in getting the bulk of our fuel from the highway shop.
Would it make some sense to reduce that line then to reflect reality a little bit more?
I think we can. If it's one of those things. If the prices stay steady, I think we're fine. And the highway shop buys out far enough that extends a little farther than the actual gas prices do. I think there is some room there based on what we're seeing as far as gas prices.
Yeah, trying to predict gas prices. If you can do that, then. But it strikes me that if we're significantly down from our projected costs, maybe splitting the difference might make some sense, or some reduction in that number a little bit.
Yeah, that's probably one of the good line items where I can see we've been doing some significant savings and it's been holding steady.
Good.
Marshal or Sheriff, would you have something in mind as far as a change there? I know we're on the fly here, but we're also going to be talking about some reductions on revenues. Do you have a ballpark of where that is based on trends?
Well, keep in mind when we budgeted that, our gas prices was $1 cheaper a gallon than what it is now. So we can't probably realistically go, I don't know, Marshall, less than $100,000 to be safe.
That's what I was thinking. I thought about $15,000 would be safe. I'd hate, always we can always decrease, but at the end of the year, we're going to have to pay the gas bill. So it all depends. We could decrease it more, but then if gas prices increase, our mileage usually doesn't fluctuate too much every year, but it's just that cost of gas. We could take it $15,000, $20,000. I think 15 would be very safe. Obviously, if we're going to fill our squad cars, if we have to go over a bit, that's just going to happen too.
I certainly don't want to encourage you to cut it more than is reasonable, but we're looking at a situation here where $15,000 additional gas money in the sheriff's budget means $15,000 less somewhere else. So I'd like to be realistic about this and give us a figure that makes some sense. I have a question also, and this is not so much about the budget, but about what is the public or the police radio line?
What that is for, that's a combination of several things. Police radio, each of our radios is assigned a number through the state. They're all assigned numbers. You can't just have radios, as many radios as you want. We have to pay certain fees to the state for our radio system. That's the biggest chunk of it. Partially out of there too, we take for replacement radios. Obviously, everybody has a portable radio. Each of our squad has 2 squad-based radios. If one of those goes bad and we have to buy a new one, it can be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Same thing with a portable. Of partially out of there if we have to replace anything or we do reprogramming or any fixing to these. That's what that line item is for.
So it's a combination of licensing fees and, well, potentially you're gonna almost inevitably gonna have to replace some equipment.
That's correct.
License for additional, oh, you explained that already. Recruitment of employees, second from the bottom. HR has a fairly significant line in their budget for recruitment. Did you get this number from HR, or how did you come up with the 5,000?
That's the amount it's been for some time. What comes out of there is we're required to complete psychological tests and drug testing for our new hires. And psychological tests, I believe, are $450 per person at this point. So depending on the amount of employees we hire a year, that also is for reserve employees for their drug testing. So at $450 per employee to do a psych test, and I believe it's anywhere from between $60 and $100 for the drug screening. The 5,000 seems like a lot, but it really doesn't go that far when you're talking anywhere, $600-700 per employee for those required tests.
Okay, yeah, and I didn't think it, it's not that big a dollar amount. It was just that I was wondering what specifically it was for. And I have one more question on the patrol budget, and that's for the canine donation expenses. Should that number not match the revenue line?
That is a good question.
But we don't necessarily spend, we may take revenue in throughout the year in a donation line item, but we don't necessarily anticipate spending the same amount. This year was the exception that we had to replace a dog, so we probably spent more than what we took in, but it wouldn't necessarily match the revenue line item because we can't predict what our revenue is going to be on a donation line item.
Right. Okay.
All right. There's no other questions on patrol. I'll move on then to emergency first responders. That pretty much is flat. Anything of note there, Sheriff? It looks like everything is pretty much status quo on that one.
Yeah, pretty much status quo. That's our first responders, volunteers throughout the county, just training and supplies for operating expenses, and those we don't pay them a dime for gas to respond to things or pay them a salary at all. It's just basically to keep volunteers in supplies and active throughout the county.
What's the in-rem line?
Marshall, what is that 500 in?
I saw that too, and I was thinking that must have been something that was created years ago for some reason, and I truthfully have no idea what it is. Keith, do you have any idea? It was one of those. It was probably broke out for a reason, and why it's there, I guess I'd have to do some research on.
It's got a number, so we should theoretically be able to track any expenditures from that fund, right?
Yep. Yeah, I'd recommend maybe Marshall or Sheriff is maybe just, look through history, and certainly we can help you with that too. Their, actual history on that.
I mean, $500 is, you could use it to buy donuts for the Judiciary and Law Committee meetings. That'd be.
All right. Any others? Otherwise, I'll move down to jail. Hearing nothing, I'll move down to jail. And again, please stop me if we have questions. Now in the jail, again, we're looking at the wages and benefits. I don't know if there's anything of note here. I don't believe there was any staffing changes or anything going on in this budget. So this would be everything that's been provided by HR payroll.
Right. And no additional staff requested. We're just happy to keep the ones that we have and replace the ones that leave. So.
Okay. Okay, we'll move down to operating budgets. Those are all the areas in yellow. Again, prisoner health, I don't know, Sheriff, if you want to note or talk to that. this increase here, the 15.7% for prisoner mental health contract?
Yeah, to give you a little background on that, we initially budgeted $35,000 when we had a contract with Human Services to come over into the jail and provide our mental health services to our inmates. Things fell apart with the contract with our Human Services, and so we had to source our mental health services out to the same company that does our physical health, our nurse and medication and doctor providers. And there was an increase in that, what they would provide the mental health services for our facility. And that's why you see an increase there.
And actually, that's just part of it. The contract with Human Services fell apart just before this year. So for 2021, we budgeted 35,000. At the last second, we had to contract with our existing medical health provider to provide mental health services for this year. So it was actually more than 35,000 this year for the services. This is reflecting, actually, if you consider it, 2 years worth of increases, because this year's increase was not reflected in there because of the lateness of the contract, and then the increase for next year's contract.
I don't want to get into this question today deeply at all, but one of the most common questions that I get is, do we wind up paying medical services, psychological services, et cetera, for those prisoners that we house for other agencies like the state? And again, we've talked about this in committee a couple of times, so I don't want to get into it now, but I'm just kind of giving you a heads up that may be a question that comes up again at executive committee. And if so,
I'll give you the short answer, Chairman Tripp. No, we don't pay anything additional for housing outside inmates. We're contracted with our medical and mental health provider for up to 21 additional non-county inmates. They've kind of got folded into that contract. So as long as we stay under 21 non-Dunn County inmates, we see no additional costs. And that's been one benefit to being able to house 15 state inmates, is because we didn't have any additional costs to our mental health or medical costs.
And
excellent, thank you.
And speaking from the mental health portion, we're contracted for hours per week for mental health. And a lot of what that is them coming and speaking to the inmates to classify their mental health situation at that time. If they were somehow put under some type of watches, to rank them and release them from certain levels of watches. Again, it's an hourly thing per week. Sometimes, it just depends on the people that have the issues that week, the time it takes. So we're not really paying for mental health, I want to say services. It's more of it's an overwatch and a classification system based upon their standing in the jail at that time.
Okay, I'll keep moving on here then. Assuming no other questions, stop me if there are. Let's see here, looking for notable changes, and looks like everything else is pretty much status quo, even operationally. So again, any other questions on the jail budget? The expenditures are increasing 2.11%. The largest part of that are predominantly driven by wages and benefits. All right, hearing no other questions, we'll move into the jail assessment. This is the expenditure side, and I know one of the things, and Sheriff, definitely please chime in here, but one of the things that we talked about a couple of years ago is we've got this dedicated revenue source that can only be used essentially for the jail, for improvements or things like that, and or major maintenance. And what we adopted or started doing, I think it was 2 years ago, if I'm correct, is that we're budgeting an amount, because we'd have things like a dryer or a dishwasher or door locks or whatever fail due to the age and in use. And without funding budgeted for this dedicated revenue source, then we're having to go through budget adjustments and all the delays and everything. So we felt it prudent, and everybody's agreed to this point, that we have the $85,000 in projected annual revenue coming in. And so we budget 50,000 for ongoing maintenance or improvement projects. Sheriff, did you have anything specific or Marshall on any potential things for this next year?
Well, we've been looking at a new flooring project. The carpet, believe it or not, in the housing units is 20 years old, over 20 years old with the building now. It's stained, disgusting. We'd like to, we may have to wait another year, 6 months. We'd like to pull all that carpet out and make it more sanitary and do almost like an epoxy coating on it, a non-slip epoxy coating to make it a better surface to clean. We go through a lot of vacuum cleaners, if you can imagine inmates, how well they vacuum and how, let's just say, rough they are on the vacuum cleaners. I question every time I see another purchase of vacuum cleaners, but we go through a lot of them trying to clean that carpet in there. And it's nearly impossible at this point to maintain that over 20-year-old carpet. So that's one of the major projects we're looking at, trying to improve the facility. And that would certainly be something that would come out of jail assessment funds. But the first bid we got on that is close to $100,000 to redo the entire facility. So we're kind of analyzing that and maybe looking for some additional bids to see where we can get a little more realistic on that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, if you don't mind if I jump in here. Didn't we borrow that money, 6.5 million, to do a lot of those upgrades? Wasn't that all part of that? I think that was all discussed in that meeting, wasn't it?
No, none of the money for the jail is borrowed. Any improvements to the jail that have happened anytime. Well, not for next year, I know for sure. We've had some improvements such as upgraded the camera system and items like that in the past, but we haven't had anything that's been borrowed for improvements to the jail. Most of these improvements that come out of this are smaller or replacements of hardware such as kitchen steamers, garbage disposals, the locks on the doors themselves that need to be replaced. But there's nothing for the 2022 budget that was requested to be borrowed or any improvements to that extent. There's no major projects for the jail next year that would have required that.
Unless Supervisor Bauer, you're referring to the roof project, but that's being done as we speak. They're still working on that, but.
Yeah, that would have been through facilities rather than the sheriff's office.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Dave.
it seems like, if I remember right, we get about 85,000 a year in the jail assessment. So if the fund isn't down to zero, it seems like that you'd have enough to do that floor in within a year or less.
Yep, and we should. I hate to run it to zero, just because it's over a 20-year-old facility and things happen. But I'd hate to run it down to zero, but that's something I've considered, the current balance and see where we're at. It's going to be close.
Well, you'd be replenishing it starting right again the next year. So
yeah, it's a rolling. Yeah, and technically it's a rolling fund that money's coming into that jail assessment funds all the time through the court.
right.
So we would be replenishing that. So in the jail assessment funds, if it's anything to improve the facility, it pretty much has to be bolted down or become part of the building to qualify for jail assessment funds. So the floor would obviously qualify, and that would be a long-term. I mean, if we pulled out the carpet and put down an epoxy flooring now, that it would probably outlive me. So I don't think we'd ever have to do it again.
And is there a possibility that you could do a part of the jail this year and part of it next year?
Yeah, and I think that's something we need to evaluate is, kind of take the Huber dorms seem to be a little more taken care of. There's less traffic on them daily than the pod section where there's an inmate in there, 24 hours a day in heavy traffic and sitting around the day room all day long. So we may be able to split it over a 2-year project and do half the building 1 year and the other half the next.
And just for the benefit of the committee, I'm looking at the executive audit summary for fiscal year 2020, and the audit report for jail assessment fees has approximately just over 63,000 in there. So yeah, when the team has done the review on different options, and if it becomes something that is desired to be approved, obviously we would work together with the sheriff's office to project forward. And if you need to move forward with it this year or in 2022 or in future years, certainly you could bring all that information together and time it out on when you'd want to do it. Could be a budget adjustment, even if you pass this budget as it is now. If the priority is to get that done for various reasons, that can be a budget adjustment at some point next year with better information. Okay, any other questions on jail assessment? Okay, well, I guess we've reached the bottom on the expenditures. So the last part is, as Supervisor Rogers had asked about the equipment down here, 3 squads at 38,000, and the other items that Marshall had mentioned on here. This is the expenditure side, basically for all the items that they're requesting funding for. Anything to point out there, Sheriff or Marshall?
I guess I know Marshall pretty well covered it. The IT software, Marshall can probably cover that a little bit, but that's kind of that putting that money away into a piggy bank for future expansion and replacement.
Well, this one here is capital. I'm sorry, Sheriff. There's no request for 2020.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that got moved and shuffled around.
Yeah.
To Luann's purse, like we say around here.
Right.
I can speak for the other things. Just the squad car cameras and the radars are just equipment that we want to keep on a regular replacement basis to keep them up to date. Again, as with the squad cars, we're trying to keep in the 3 to 4 squad cars per year, so we don't see these up and down purchases, from year to year. If we can keep them rotated consistently between the 3 and 4, there's no large, unexpected expenses. Same thing with cameras and the radar. If we can replace them on a revolving basis, we keep a pretty good track of how old these items are, what type of issues they've had with them. So we try to keep those replaced to avoid any large, individual year purchases. The ballistic plates are, again, one of those things too. They have a life cycle of approximately 5 to 6 years. They've exceeded the life cycle at this point. So that's why we're requesting the replacement of those.
All right.
What is a ballistic plate?
Those are the plates that are worn in a carrier by our deputies. But you have the regular body armor, which is protection against small arms. The ceramic ballistic plates are for stopping rifles and large caliber rounds. The officers carry them within their cars, and they're responding to residences where there's an indication of rifles, which I'm sure is every house in Dunn County most of the time. That's something they can don to protect themselves from rifle fire. And again,
Okay.
Those are one of those that expire, and you don't want to be wearing something that's 5 years outside their life cycle and hoping that's going to help you.
Hard to recruit when you've got a situation like that.
Yeah, it's inexpensive insurance, even though it looks like a lot of money.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and turn it over to the chair. I did note at least the adjustment items that came up in conversation, but it's at the pleasure of the committee and what you'd like to do next.
Keith, would you outline the items where we have suggested changes in the budget? And then if the committee would like to, they can pass a motion to forward the budget with those changes?
Sure. And certainly if I misspeak on any of these, somebody speak up, Sheriff, Marshall, or committee. The first one was reducing the revenue, the jail revenue, essentially for the contracts. by $125,000 down to $300,000. So that's a revenue reduction. Which would mean that it would have to shift over to property tax levy. Move the UTV from other funding sources funded by long-term debt over to tax levy, and that $17,000 change. And then to decrease the gas expenditures in the patrol budget by $15,000. Those are the three that were noted in the discussion.
Keith, the $17,000 UTV expense would be offset by not hiring a full-time deputy to replace the retiring deputy. Do we need to make any changes in the budget document to reflect that?
Well, you can do one of two things. I know that was discussed as potential, but if you're going to make a change like that, I guess I would need either direction to adjust the wages and benefits for that impacted budget, on a hiring day to achieve that. I don't know, Marshall or Kevin, if you have some thoughts on how to accomplish that, whether it's delayed filling or, it'd be something along those lines. Because we're here, this one's even a little more complex because you're kind of shuffling things around.
I've got a question for Keith or for the sheriff or marshal. Right now, the way we do budgeting, if we left the wages and salaries there, you can adjust from line to line, can you not? So if we didn't do anything and we just took out the debt part of it, they could adjust money from line to line to take care of that. Correct?
Yeah, if you're talking once the budget is passed, yes. But
Yes.
to present a balanced budget, we would have to increase with no other identified expenditure cuts or revenue sources. We'd have to take it out of general property tax because you've only got one shot at that.
Right, I realize that, but
Okay.
that was a question. So I guess my thinking, and I'd like to hear from the sheriff and marshal, but 125,000 is a lot of money. But when you look at a $7,500,000 budget, it's not a real huge percentage. So if we took the 17,000 out of long-term debt and we didn't give you any more levy than you have now proposed in this budget, that would give you an incentive to make up your revenue from other counties. And with your big budget, you think you could do that?
Well, if I could just speak towards the portion of it for wages and salaries, obviously, if we don't go ahead and fill that position with a deputy, there's going to be savings from day one until whenever that happens. 6 months or it's a year, there's going to be savings there, realized because you won't be expending the salary for the deputy over the correctional officer thing. And we also have, when we hire and transfer positions, there's always a break in there at some point. So there's naturally built in some savings in wages and salaries, as we all see in the departments, because when one person leaves, you don't immediately fill it the next day with the next person. So there's a good way to make it up within there. And like the sheriff said, I think there's going to be opportunities for us to make income from other counties, as well as the fact that he discussed, we're seriously wondering where the state's going to put all these inmates that they've contracted out to the jails like us over the years. The money might even be in the budget. That doesn't mean that they don't have to have a place to be. The state has a correctional officer issue like any county does, and a space issue. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been contracting these inmates out to us in the first place. I'm not saying that we're going to see that money back, but I would be really surprised if something didn't occur where we're getting state inmates at some point also.
And I guess that's what I'm thinking, and that's why I'm saying we leave the budget the way it is, as far as the levy portion, and you have to adjust your expenses and your revenues to reflect that.
And I think that's reasonable. The bottom line is give us a pot of money and we try and realistically budget where that's going to come from. And sometimes adjustments need to be made throughout the year. And I think that's $17,000 is easy enough to do that with.
I'm not talking about just the 17,000, Sheriff. I'm talking about the 17,000 and the 125,000.
Sure. Yeah, we'll certainly do what we can on our end. There's a couple things we can, look at. The warrant, the warrant fee ordinance that was passed. I think we need to look at how that's applied, ordered by the judges. And we can revisit the booking fee that when that was passed, it was passed by the county board to only be collected once a person's convicted of a crime. Well, that's nearly impossible for us to, it would take more man hours for us at $25 an hour to try and find some of that. So we can revisit the ordinance on the booking fee for the jail, which would increase our revenue of approximately $50,000 right there. So there's ways we can certainly look at increasing the revenue.
All right.
So as far as budgeting goes, if I'm following the conversation here, those sound like more of on-the-fly adjustments as we go through a year. But we're at a point here where, and I agree with all the discussion, but in order to balance a budget out here, if we're saying that the revenue needs to be adjusted by 125,000 down, or that state contract and other things, that's fine. It is what it is. And we want to change the revenue source for the UTV. That's what, $142,000. We've got an offset in reduced costs for gas. So we're still approximately 127,000 of either reduced expenditures or increased revenues to budget for. So
And what I'm saying is we don't increase revenues, decrease expenses.
okay, and that's what I'm trying to clarify here. So I would need either as part of the motion to, I guess, ask staff, the department and finance and HR to work together on how to accomplish that for presentation to, unless you have specific ideas on how we would present that to executive committee on September 8th. You could do it by delayed filling. You could put a target date of July 1 for the new position or for the new combined position. But I don't know that that's going to get you 100% there. So it would.
Well, I think we should give them give the sheriff's department, the sheriff and marshal, the time to come up with their new expense figures to balance the budget until you need them before executive.
Yeah, which would have to be no later than the end of this week, because the following week we'd have 2 business days to get it ready for executive, less than 2 business days.
If we offered a motion to recommend the budget with the reduction in income from prisoners, the reduction of the or the elimination of the long-term debt for the UTV, and the change in gas expenses, and the note that Sheriff's Department would make further recommendations for the executive committee. If we had a motion like that, Keith, would it make sense and do what we need to do?
Yes, if you're giving us that general direction that no levy increase, but basically it'd be reduction in net expenses from, I believe, Sheriff, correct me if I'm wrong, was most of that or all of that's in the patrol budget. So it would have to be going through the patrol budget.
Yep, it would be, everything, every part of that is patrol budget.
Okay, so yes, we could make that work. That would give us enough general direction to move forward.
Supervisor Rogers, you had your hand up. Do you have a comment, question?
I guess I'm not sure that I do or don't understand what Chairman Bartlett was saying. Are you saying that we do not recognize a decrease in the revenue we're generating, so we don't reduce that 425 down to 300? Is that
No.
what you're suggesting?
No, what I'm suggesting is we recognize that. And we recognize that we're going to take the long-term debt of 17,000 out. But we do not give the sheriff's department any more levy. So they have to work with the amount of levy that they've got in this proposed budget. They've got all sorts of things they can work on. Maybe that revenue from that 125,000 line doesn't have to go down that far because they can get revenue from other counties. Maybe there'll be a savings in not having all of those prisoners there if in fact they end up that they don't really have 15, they have 15 less all year. Maybe, as Marshall stated, that just retirements and then refilling positions, there'll be some savings there throughout the year. Maybe there'll be enough saving, maybe there'll be some savings in the position that for the court security officer. But I'm just saying that within the whole budget, 125,000 isn't a big percentage out of 7.5 million. And I think there's some savings there that they can come and keep the levy at the same. We've got levy limits, and this kind of throws a cog in everything that's been figured here. And if we can keep the levy portion of their budget the same, and they can work with that, and I think listening to Marshall and the sheriff that they're willing to at least try that. And that's what I'm saying.
Would we be better off not reducing the income from 425 to 300 and maybe just reduce it down to 350 or 375? It's not a hard number anyway. It's a projection, and you could make the argument you're projecting that there's some alternate opportunity through other counties or states to house some inmates.
Well, I guess what I was proposing, Supervisor Rogers, was that we make the motion that they get the levy that as proposed, and the reduction of the long-term debt of 17,000, and they get to fill in the rest of the figures as they want to. And they've got a week to do it, evidently.
I hear a motion. Do I hear a second?
Jim's on seconds.
Jim's on seconds. What
Mr.
we've got
Chair.
is a motion. 1 second, Keith, and then what we've got is a motion on the floor that would maintain the levy request at its present level. We're going to recommend this budget with knowing that there will be changes in the income or the revenue line from housing prisoners, that the $17,000 long-term debt would be eliminated, and the sheriff's department would work out the details on the rest. That's what I heard as a motion. Keith, go ahead. And
Yes, this one's unique. Here's another factor. Round one, the information you're working with was July 28th dated. Since then, we've got health and dental insurance and all the other adjustments I mentioned, but we've also got class comp. We don't have those details yet. We will be scrambling to have all of that put together. That will complicate our ability to have a solid answer. So we'll do the best that we can. But if I'm hearing from you and from the committee is that you want no levy increase. And if that's what's approved, that will be the overarching. And if you're fine with my team, HR, the sheriff's department working together to come up with that end goal that you want no long-term borrowing in this and you want no levy increase in this budget. If that's your
over what's stated in this proposal.
I think I'm just making sure that everybody's understanding that
Right.
it could be more than maybe what's been discussed to this point. There's going to be more layers to this onion. So if you're generally fine with that, and those are the overarching goals of the committee, no levy increase, adjusting revenues and expenditures to make it work to that effect, and no long-term borrowing. I think that gives us enough to work with, and obviously Kevin, Marshall, and I will have our work cut out.
Chairman Bartlett, did I understand your motion correctly?
I think so. Yes.
Now, I just want to make sure that we understand that we're talking, when we're talking about levy, we're talking about the levies that's in this budget proposal. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Then we have a motion, discussion. Supervisor Rogers.
So in response to what Keith said, I have a little bit of a concern that there's a lot of unknowns that we're just assuming that all of that can be absorbed within the budget. Hopefully it's not a lot, but we don't necessarily know that. And I would kind of like to hear from the sheriff if he believes that what we're proposing is realistic. I would love it to be the way we could move forward, but I'd like his input too.
Yeah, and I think it's realistic. I think what you've seen in past years, if you've looked at our expenditures, you've seen us basically return over $100,000 annually the last couple of years. That we're conservative on our spending. We take advantage of not filling positions if we can get away with it and stuff. I believe my first budget as sheriff, we didn't spend, I don't want to say returned, but it was close to $200,000 or over $200,000 that we had monies available to us that we did not spend. Last year was slightly over $100,000. So we try and be realistic on the budget, but we've seen some expenditures, or we've saved some expenditures over the last couple of years. And I think it's realistic that we can either come up with, additional revenue to replace those state inmates, or that we can cut corners somewhere else. Catastrophes happen, and we could blow this budget out of the water on January 2nd. We never know, but we try and give you the most realistic numbers we can give you and work with it on that. So, but I think we've shown in the past that we've saved the county money and by saving expenditures over the last 2 years. I think we can come up with what Chairman Bartlett's proposing here.
Thank you, Sheriff. And I want to make one other comment at this point as well. What the committee is going to do is recommend something to the executive committee. And frankly, there are a number of unknowns that might change things significantly. If that's the case, the executive committee then has an opportunity to make the adjustments that might be necessary. Mr. Stride, go ahead.
Yeah, and one final thing I just want to make sure I'm clear on too, and make sure that my understanding is clear in respect to the committee, is this doesn't lock to any one of the multiple functional areas of the sheriff's budget. The sheriff's budget is the umbrella of jail, all of this. If your overarching goal is no debt, tax levy across all of those cost centers, I just want to be clear, because I've had some committees either get confused or maybe a little frustrated. Let's say the sheriff and Marshall and I come up with a plan that we're going to reduce jail versus patrol or whatever. I just want to make sure everybody's understanding it could be the whole gamut of those areas. If there's no concern with that, then I think we've got a good general understanding of where we need to work.
Thanks for the clarification. Other questions, discussion about the motion? Seeing none, we have a motion to recommend the budget with the noted changes to the executive committee. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, folks. It's been a good discussion, very productive. As I said, we've still got some figures that are going to come in that we don't know about yet, and the executive committee will take all that into account when we meet next in, what, about the second week in September? When are we meeting?
September 8th.
September 8th. So tune in. Thanks to the Sheriff's Department. You guys do a good job as always. Appreciate your willingness to talk to us about these things, explain things, and we'll take it from there. Thank you. All right, next order of business, and I see Andrea is with us, so we're going to take up the budget for the district attorney's office. And we'll do the same thing we've done in the past, and that is start with the organizational chart. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Keith and Andrea. And
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'll go to share my screen, and then I'll turn it over to you, Andrea, to at least go over your staffing, proposed staffing for next year. And everybody should see the organizational chart.
yep, it's there.
Okay, Andrea?
Yeah, I really don't have any changes to my proposed chart. We're doing real good with the additional assistant district attorneys, and so I have nothing else to change.
Oh, good.
All right, any questions from the committee? Otherwise, I'll move on to the budget itself. All right, let me swing over to that. All right, like the other ones, here's the summary. Actually, an overall, let's see here, decrease in this budget, and we'll go over more of the specifics when we get into the details. So,
Did you all hear that? I heard a wild cheer go up in my neighborhood. You probably did too, right?
you don't see these very often. So obviously there's reasons that this is happening. So with that, I will turn it over to Andrea. If you want to hit, I'll scroll through like we've done with the others and maybe flag anything that jumps out at me. But again, committee or Andrea, stop me if you have any points, but let's start with the revenues. First thing is the tax levy. It's a decrease. And basically the notes off to the side, and sorry, let me scroll that over for you. Benefit elections of staff. Andrea, I think that's probably health insurance, correct? People going from family to single or not carrying it at all.
Right, it's mainly due to a change in turnover. There's very little staff in my office who are electing to take the county's health insurance. So that's why.
Okay. And then over here, in this one, subject to change yet with final balancing with the health insurance, the tax levy match dollars for victim witness, but maybe it's not match dollars, but it's for the county position that's not funded for grant dollars, is up. And largely, yeah, this is a very small budget, health insurance again, in this case. And this one fluctuates with how the grant is. We start, and correct me if I'm wrong here, we start with the known grant amount, and then we work backwards from there, and the county has to pick up whatever difference. Is that correct, Andrea?
Right, and then the change here is just due to changes in health insurance on the victim witness side. So there's been an employee there who's elected to family coverage, which we haven't had before. So the DA side's way down on health insurance, the victim witness is up, and so it sort of equals itself out.
So then that goes to this bottom line where the decrease of just over 1%. So any questions by the committee or anything else I've missed, Andrea?
No, our ease up a little bit. I know we've had some discussions in the past about how we're going to try to move to county IT. There's some hoops we have to go through with the state IT network, which has not been fast at all. Hoping it will be accomplished in 2022. But it all depends on when they will give this missing part to our county IT. But our hope is that that will have some good benefits with us in the sheriff's office and other law enforcement transferring files electronically.
Okay, so we're in the expenditure section again, like the others, wages and benefits, and those information comes from payroll HR. The notable increase, 4.93% in salaries and wages, but you do have employees that are going through the STEP program, newer employees, so that would create that. Health insurance incentive, you've talked about the health insurance, so I won't go there again. So then we're down into the operating section here of maintenance in the DA's budget. And I think you hit on some of the major ones there already with the IT applications and so on. Let's see here. IT equipment, yes, you touched on that as well. Adjustments there. So any other questions on the district attorney's budget? Overall, on the expenditure side, it's a decrease of 2.5%. Okay, I'll keep going.
Did I miss the compensation, the compensated absences for 25,000? What changed from 21 to 22?
Is there a planned retirement to be paid out in 2022?
Yes.
Yeah, that is for a planned retirement at some point in 2022, and individuals indicated that their plan. So this has been the county's budget practice for the last 4 years, that if an employee volunteers that up or offers that information up, that we budget for that, so that the budget isn't put in a bad position of having to not fill positions or not do certain things because they didn't account for that. It doesn't lock anybody into anything, but it establishes at least there's funding to cover those costs.
Very good. I like that.
Yep, it's not where we'd like it to be, where it'd be an ongoing pot that's there that we wouldn't necessarily have to do this, but this is the best that we can do. All right, and I will keep scrolling down. We had finished district attorney if there's no other questions. All right, victim witness. Again, here, there was some overtime and achieved actual overtime in prior years. So it was projected in. Again, these all came from HR payroll. Again, we talked about the health insurance here. And this budget, and then there's another page with the grants kind of interact between the two, because we've got pretty much a fixed amount on what the grant funding will be. So this kind of balances out with that. Any question over this 30.59%? Again, that's the IT allocations for replacing equipment. Andrea, anything of note there? Was there additional equipment issued in recent years where now you have maybe one more laptop than you had in the past, or a couple laptops?
I think part of it is the laptop, and then the other part is just for IT. The county wants, even the state employees, for us to have email addresses, and so I guess we get charged to have a county email address. So in the past, we've just not given them to some of the victim witness.
All right, so that's victim witness, the non-grant side of it. Then I'll move down to the next page, which would be the grants. And this will show the victim witness grants, the revenue source. We receive between federal and state grants just over $158,000. And not really projecting we're actually projecting a decrease. Andrea, is this really related to, it's highly connected to the staffing that we have costs. And with us having a very senior person recently retire, that would have the biggest impact.
Exactly.
Okay. So the rest of this, the wages and benefits are allocated out, working with the DA's office and HR information in. Health insurance, the note over here, this is adjusted as we go to keep the total grant funding maximized. Then we get into the operating expenditures. And these really are, I guess I'll just speak in general terms, and certainly Andrea, chime in here. These are tied to pretty much the grant budget and what we're eligible to be reimbursed for.
Right. And so we sort of get this pot of money and then we have to allocate it through the different line items. I think in a little bit, a small part due to the health insurance for an employee who's elected that family health insurance. We've decreased some of our other costs just to stay within the budget amount that we get for the grant funds. And I think it's doable. I mean, we won't have, when we didn't have an employee take that, we had a lot of extra cash that we could, burn near the end of the year. We won't have that anymore, but we could certainly get by because we've had that in the past and have been able to buy office chairs and that sort of thing.
So that, I believe, brings us to the end of, the DA's budget, the grant and non-grants. Any questions by the committee or anything else we need to cover on the details? Okay, I'm going to then stop sharing the detailed budget and turn it over to Mr. Chair to entertain action.
As in the past, I would entertain a motion to recommend the budget from the DA's office to the executive committee. So far, I have not heard any suggested changes or amendments to the budget, but if you want to do that before the motion and include it in the motion, or we can have a motion and we can amend that, whichever way you choose. But having said all that, if anybody's got any changes to suggest, or if not, if somebody wants to make the motion that we recommend the budget, either would be appropriate at this time.
I make a motion that we recommend the budget to the executive committee as written.
Sounds moves recommendation. And who seconded?
I did.
Supervisor Rogers seconds. We have a motion and a second to recommend the budget to the executive committee. Very few questions. I had a few questions in the margin of the budget, but most of them were answered before we got started. So seeing no questions or further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to recommend, say aye.
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 Or wave your hand. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, folks. That concludes our business. The only thing left on the agenda is announcements. Does anybody have any announcements? As I've indicated a couple of times, this will go to executive committee. So if you're interested in the next step in the budget process, that September 8th meeting would be, and I'm assuming that'll be on Zoom, right, Chairman Bartlett?
Yes.
And it'll probably be recorded. But if you're interested, that's always full of action-packed drama. Other announcements, Supervisor Rogers.
So we would watch that on the YouTube stream, not on the Zoom stream, right?
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right, seeing no other business, this meeting is adjourned. My thanks to all those who made it possible. Katie for setting things up and taking notes. Krista, Chairman Bartlett, you have one last thing to add?
No, I
after
just
adjournment?
waving